Well, I'm not a farmer, and I've never played one on TV. However, I do have a little bit of experience farming because my grandparents had a large garden, home garden that they farmed. Actually, 2 large plots of ground they set aside. 1 acre approximately was just all different kinds of beans and corn, tomato and cabbage and lettuce and tomatoes and everything like that. A full produce stand in their garden, and the other field was planted like you see here with corn. So my grandparents gardened, and their free help to run the farm were their grandkids who lived just a few miles away. So often on Friday or Saturday they run out their car, and at that time it was neat to ride with the grandparents. My parents didn't drive, and that's a different story. So we'd ride out with the grandparents to the farm, and we'd usually eat a really good meal that Grandma would prepare, and then we would be sitting on our hinds ends, scooting along a row of beans or a row of corn, weeding it from one end of the garden to the next. So I'm making this too long. I just need to get to the point. The point is, I know a little bit about farming because I know that you have to plow in the spring. I know you have to sow the seed, and then you have to water it. If the sky isn't providing the water, you got to get water on the items in the field, and then you have to wait for the harvest. Knowing a little bit about farming, and I imagine most of you don't have farming experience, but knowing a little bit about farming is very helpful when it comes to the scripture, because the Bible is full of allusions, analogies, examples of farming. You know, from the ministry of Jesus, you know about the parables of the wheat and the tares, and you know about the sower went forth to sow. And so knowing a little bit about farming is very helpful when you're studying the scripture. And that's going to be very helpful in the next 3 chapters, chapter 8, 9, and 10, because there are a lot of allusions or references to farming in these chapters. For the sake of our study, I'm grouping all of these chapters together, 8, 9, and 10. I'm going to preach on 3 chapters, not every verse, I promise. But I want you to get the gist of what's going on in the passage. And I've already read one of the key verses here. In fact, in the whole book of Hosea, chapter number 8, verse number 7, may be one of the best known verses from the book. For they have sown the wind, and they shall reap the whirlwind. How many of you actually have heard something along that line somewhere, even if you didn't know where it was in the Bible? You've heard that expression before. All right, maybe 30, 40% of you. For they have sown the wind, they shall reap the whirlwind. If we fast forward to the end of chapter number 10 of Hosea, that's the next reference on the screen, Hosea 10 and verse 12, sow to yourselves in righteousness, reap in mercy, break up your fallow ground, for it is time to seek the Lord till he come and rain righteousness upon you. Both references have reference to sowing and reaping, and they kind of link these chapters together in a single thought unit. I want you to see that up front. I'm not mushing it together. It seems as if the Bible groups these thoughts together for us. So these verses bring us now to this point. If we're really going to understand Hosea's point, we need to know a little bit about sowing and reaping. Sowing and reaping. And I want to give you just by review, you know these already, but they're going to be helpful as we go through the message today to talk about some basic rules about sowing and reaping or farming. Number 1, you only reap what you sow. You don't put one kind of seed in the ground and expect for something different. I'm going to pray really hard. You know, I'm going to put beans in, but I'm really hoping for watermelon. It's just not going to happen. All right? You're not going to get something else than what you plant. All right, the next thing is you reap after you sow. It's not immediate. It takes weeks and months, depending on the crop, for something to come to fruit. And then thirdly, you reap more than you sow. And this is a wonderful blessing. It would be pitiful if you put one seed in the ground and you only get one seed back out. What's the point? But God's really made it prolific. In fact, Jesus said in the New Testament, and he gave them some 30, some 60, some 100-fold. And that's pretty exciting when that happens. I know that Bill Sealshot, who's visited here a number of times from back in Illinois, he has a farm that's being managed or run by others, and he likes it when he has a good return, like 30 or 60 fold on his cornfields, because he gets a cut of that, and it makes him really delighted when he reaps more than is sowed. So these farming rules have direct bearing on every person in this room, even if you're not a farmer. Stay with me, right? Even if you don't ever care to put anything in the ground. Baked into the system of life is that when you put certain things in, you're going to get certain things out. That's just the way it works in life. The way you invest is going to influence what comes out eventually in life. Your investment is going to pay dividends at some point, either ones you like or ones you don't like. So these laws of the harvest apply to every life in the room. And Hosea wants us to know in his sermon series to the children of Israel, if you sow the wind, you are going to reap the whirlwind. Now let's get to the bottom of what he meant by this. So we're going to start this way today. 3 points. The first one is sowing the wind. If you're in Hosea chapter 8, I hope if you've found it by now or if you've had to leaf through, I hope you're there. Chapter 8, verse 1 is where I'd like to start. Again, set the trumpet to thy mouth. He shall come as an eagle against the house of the Lord, because they have transgressed my covenant and trespassed against my law. All right, so right at the outset of this chapter, he says, set the trumpet to thy mouth. Now, when you think about a trumpet, you probably think of that shiny brass instrument that hits the really high notes in the orchestra. But that is not what the word is here. It's the Hebrew word shofar. And it's that long, curly horn that makes just an unusual sound if you've ever heard it blowed. And it was used, if you go back to Numbers 10, we're not going to do that, but it was used to sound an alarm, to assemble the people, and sometimes to assemble the army for war. Now, why would Hosea say you got to put a trumpet up and warn the people? Why do we have to assemble the army? What's going on here? Well, look at the next phrase. He shall come as an eagle against the house of the Lord. Who is going to come as an eagle? You might be tempted to think it's God, but that's not the reference here. He's talking about enemy nations that are going to come against Israel like an eagle. Now, you know what an eagle does when it's going after prey? Just this week, I was studying this passage, and I went out here across Cortera Road, across the railroad tracks, and shut up the frontage road. Some of you have run the frontage road up there toward the outlet mall. And just as I was zipping up, this hawk from the right-hand side of the road swept down in front of my car, maybe 20 yards. I felt like I was going to pop it, but it was going fast. And I'm like, what's it after? And it went across the road, and there's a little irrigation ditch, and just on the other side of the irrigation ditch was a small animal. I couldn't see at the speed I was driving, and if you've seen me drive, I drive furiously like Jehu does his chariot, and so I didn't see the animal, but I could see that the hawk tried to grab the thing with the talons and lift off, but he missed because I saw him going up and his talons were empty. So that's the idea here. Man, the enemy is going to come down and snatch you up. And he's going to come against the house of the Lord. Normally when we read house of the Lord in the Bible, we're thinking about God's house, the temple in Jerusalem. But this is talking about northern Israel. You might recall the temple doesn't even dwell in northern Israel. They have false gods up there. It's talking about really the whole people, all the house of all the people under the umbrella of northern Israel. The eagle's going to swoop down, grab up all the people. Why? Because they've transgressed my covenant, trespassed against my law. Transgressed means to violate, to step across, to ignore, to give little concern to God's law. So how had Israel violated or trespassed God's law? We want to figure out, what does it mean to sow the wind? And he's going to tell us here in the next few chapters. Let's look at least 4. There are more. For sake of time, I'm going to give you 4. Sowing the wind. Number 1, They're choosing without asking God. We see this immediately in verse number 4. They have set up kings, but not by me. They have made princes, and I knew it not. They did not care to follow God's rules about who should be in leadership. Remember, who was supposed to sit on the throne of Jerusalem? There was somebody promised that your son and your son's sons will sit on my throne forever. Who was that? David, King David, right? But when the northern kingdom separated from Rehoboam in the days of Rehoboam, they didn't pick somebody from the house of David. They set up their own kings. We don't care about David and promise and covenant and all of that from 2 Samuel chapter 7. We'll just put up whoever we think. So they did not consult God about their kings or princes. And this is true about their priests too, though the priests are not mentioned in the verse. They set up their own gods in Bethel. Bethel is the southernmost city in northern Israel, and Dan is the northernmost city in northern Israel. And they set up 2 temples there, and they set up their own priests, and they did not consult God about any of their leadership. Bad news, they're sowing the wind. Here's the next one. They're chasing after idols. We see that in chapter 8, verse 4. And it's the second part of the verse I just shared. Of their silver and their gold have they made them idols that they may cut off. They took their best valuables, silver and gold, fashioned little gods, golden calves that dwelt both in Bethel and Dan, the cities I just mentioned. And they're chasing these idols rather than worshiping God at his temple, the house of the Lord in Jerusalem. They're sowing the wind. This is probably, this idea of sowing the wind probably has most reference here to chasing after idols, because they're working up themselves in worship, but it's empty, it's vanity, it's worthless. They're praying to gods that don't exist. So we would say in our language, when they go to worship, they're just blowing a lot of hot air. They ain't getting anywhere. They're just sowing wind. You know, maybe you've seen on television in India or somewhere in the Southeast Asia these little prayer handkerchiefs that they put up on these lines and roll them out, thinking that the wind is going to catch them and sweep their prayers up to whoever can help them. And this is the idea here, just sowing the wind. They're just chattering to nothingness. Those gods can't help them. What else are they doing to sow the wind? The next one coming up is they're consorting with other nations. Consorting with other nations. We get this from verse number 9, for they are gone up to Assyria, a wild donkey. By the way, I don't read the other word in the text, even if it's in the King James, because words change meaning over time. There was a time when the other word just meant what the animal is. That doesn't have the same application today. So I don't read that word in public. All right, don't be offended. All right, for they are gone up to Assyria. What does that mean, they went up to Assyria? Well, Israel lives in northern Israel. Syria is the next northernmost nation, next to them even to this day. And then beyond Syria to the east a little bit was the nation of Assyria. And one of their capitals was Nineveh. And we read about that in the book of Jonah. And so they're consorting. They're going up there for help, and they were paying money. I was reading part of this in 2 Kings this morning in my own personal time. They were sending money. Please come help us. Save us from these other nations around us. You're stronger. And they were kind of like the big bully at the time. Assyria could handle anybody. They were vicious. And so they were consorting with Assyria for protection. What problem was that? Well, these are God's people. What should they have been doing? God, would you please help us? Instead, they're emptying out their resources, their silver and their gold, and they're consorting with other nations. And God, through Hosea, is saying, listen, you're going about this the wrong way. You're looking for protection in the wrong places. You're consorting with you're sowing the wind. Here's another example. We could sum up everything that they are doing to sow the wind in just the fact that they are forgetting God. The reference there is verse 14, for Israel hath forgotten his maker and buildeth temples. So they knew God, But they had forgotten God, their maker, and were going other places for instruction, for help, for provision, rather than trusting the Lord. They had ceased to be faithful to the God who had given them life and breath and even their kingdom. Now I want you to look at that list, and I want you to understand this. Our sins today don't mirror those perfectly, but we're guilty of some of those. Let me show you. The second bullet was chasing after other gods. And the Bible says in Colossians 3:5 that covetousness is idolatry. Greed for things that I don't have. I cannot be happy until I get this. That's idolatry. You're letting things dominate your life and you're serving them rather than serving God. Here's another example. We're guilty of making important decisions without asking God. Here are some common ones, consistently a problem. We raise our kids in church, we teach them to pray, and then somehow they get to 21 and 22 and the hormones are flowing and they have no idea or no aspiration, rather, to check with God about who they're going to marry or where they're going to live or what vocation they should pursue. Here's another one. I bet there have been times when everybody in this room has kind of left God out and left him behind and forgotten him. Maybe you've treated him, not that you as a Christian would say he doesn't exist, but you can treat him like that. Just ignore him. God, I got that covered right now. Don't mess it up, all right? I've got it all figured out. And we do that sometimes, even as Christians. So we're guilty at times of sowing to the wind, of chasing worthless things rather than putting our confidence and trust in the Lord. Maybe you thought you were really going somewhere. Maybe you're thinking right now everything's really coming together. Things are really good. But if you've left God out, if you're forgetting Him, you're losing ground. You're not gaining ground. You're no better than the farmer who has this little air compressor that he carries along on his cart. And every time when he wants to sow something, he just shoots some air down in the ground. Shoot some more air. Shoot some more air. What's he going to get? If you sow to the wind, not going to get the harvest that he expects. Perhaps you think to yourself, well, that's no big deal. It's my life. It's no biggie. It's my field. If I want to pump air into my field, who's going to tell me what to do? It's my field after all. But Hosea says not so fast. The one who sows the wind is going to receive something. He's going to reap the whirlwind. Now, why does Hosea say that Israel is going to reap the whirlwind? And why the whirlwind? Well, you remember the laws of sowing and reaping we started with, and that was foundational because we needed them and we need them now. One of those is that you reap more than you sow. And that's a good thing normally. But when you sow the wrong kinds of things, it also works the same way. You reap more than you sow. So Israel was about to sow wind, and that wind was going to turn around and decimate her like a tornado does any town in Oklahoma about this time of the year. Any Oklahoma fans out there? I know we had some Oklahoma people over there. Yeah, you know what I'm talking about, Oklahoma people. Well, here's how the Bible puts it in chapter 8, verse number 13. Now will he remember their iniquity, and he will visit their sins. That same expression, remember their iniquity and visit their sins, reappears in chapter 9 and verse 9. It's a theme that goes through these chapters. When God visits here, it means he's going to visit them in punishment. When the harvest comes in, they're not going to like it. It's going to be like a tornado going off, because Israel has forgotten her God. What kind of things does he mean they're going to reap the whirlwind? I mean, how bad's it really going to get? Most of us think we can kind of, go along with God as long as it's convenient. And then when it doesn't get convenient, you know what we can do? We can kind of go our own way. And God's really loving and gracious and merciful and forgiving. Don't you teach that at your church? Yeah, we teach that here. And then we kind of think we can do our own thing and we can settle up with God later and it'll all be okay. And I talked about this a week ago. That's sinning presumptuously from Psalm number 19, verse 13. To sin with presumption or with a high hand. To know that you're doing wrong and still do it anyway. So what does it mean? What would God do to somebody who is sowing in vanity, not trusting the Lord, doing their own thing, not going God's way, like northern Israel was living at this time? Well, this is what he told Israel. Letter A, their fertility will fail. Her fertility will fail. Now, there's some irony here. The Baal gods that northern Israel had shifted their allegiance over to away from God, they were actually supposed to be fertility gods. They were supposed to be the ones that would keep the crops growing and the ground watered and everything prosperous. And not just that, their kids too. These gods were fertility gods. And so their fertility would fail in at least two ways. Let's get the reference here from chapter 9, verse 16. Ephraim, I've mentioned before, Ephraim is used to reference northern Israel because it's the largest tribe in northern Israel. So we're talking about the same group of people. Israel or Ephraim is smitten. Their root is dried up. They shall bear no fruit. And though they bring forth, yet will I slay even the beloved fruit of their womb. So he's talking about their fertility is going to fail in two ways. The root will dry up. That's their crops, no crops. Here's another reference for you, chapter 8, verse 7. They sowed the wind, they reaped the whirlwind. We've already read that. It hath no stalk, the bud yields no meal. If it would yield, the strangers would swallow it up. So either there's not going to be rain, it ain't going to grow, the stalk isn't going to come up. And if it does come up, we're going to let the enemy come in and eat the food so you don't get it. So fertility failure. Next, no kids either. If you read chapter 9, verses 12, and that's coming up on the screen, verses 12, 13, and 14, that's the same references about not having kids. Though they bring up their children, yet will I bereave them? They're going to bring up their children, they're going to bereave them. That suggests that somehow somebody's going to take their kids away. And that does happen in captivity. They would be carried away and parents separated from their kids. And there shall be not a man left, yea, woe also to them when I depart from them. And he even goes into greater language, and I think it's verse 14 talks about their kids being murdered. Ouch. So no prosperity because they have sown the wind, ignored God. Now her fertility will fail. Next. You know, before I move on, I have a note here to myself to remind us that sometimes God does choose to take a child, and that is not always a sign of divine judgment. It can be, and it was for Israel here, and they were going to connect what happened to them as judgment for rejecting or forgetting God. But sometimes faithful believers suffer the loss of a child in an accident, a disease, and a miscarriage. Even godly people go through that often, ask lots of questions as if they've been divinely judged, but that isn't always the case. So while I said that, I just wanted to temper the message a little bit for those who've been through that to understand that isn't always a sign of divine judgment. Sometimes God lets us go through trials to prove our character and our worth, and it isn't always a result of our sin. All right, so her fertility, because she had sinned, would fail. What else is going to happen to Israel for failing to follow God? Well, her friends are going to carry her away. What kind of friends did she have? You might remember the previous point I talked about the fact that she was consorting with the nations. Come on, Assyria, come on over and help me. Hey, we're friends. Here's $50,000. Aren't we good friends? You know, you're buying their friends. Well, what were friends going to do? They were going to come in and carry her away. Israel swallowed up. Now shall they be among the Gentiles as a vessel wherein is no pleasure. For a Jew, this is the biggest thing, to be carted away and have to live with Gentiles and eat Gentile food, and that's exactly what they would have to do. They would be carted away. They would be slaves and captives to Assyria, and they would have to eat Gentile food. It probably means they would eat sausage, but I actually think that would probably be a good thing, but alas, I'm distracted. Chapter 9, verse 17, my God will cast them away because they did not hearken unto him. and they shall be wonders among the nations. So God will cast them away. Her friends will carry her away. It's hard for us to really have a concept of that. We have known in America such security. We have known, that we have the mightiest army. And that was like demonstrated like a weekend ago when we flew planes from Missouri halfway around the world, dropped bombs, and they came back the same day and probably had dinner with their family. That is like incredible. And so we don't ever feel like we're close to being carried away. But if you can shift your mind for a moment into the mind of a Jew who has lived with a family member that's been held hostage by Hamas till this day, from October 7th of 2023 till now, that's 624 days, their family member has been held hostage. That's around 50 hostages. We don't know how many of them are still alive, have been held captive. Many of them living in tunnels under the ground with little to no food or water or basic necessities. They're being treated like pigs. And if you could just put your mind for a moment that you're one of those captives, or that you have a family member that's a captive right now to this terrorist organization, you can get a concept of what God's saying. You sowed the wind, you've ignored me, you didn't listen to me, you consorted with the nations. Now I'm going to take you away, and you're going to have to live with the Gentiles. Just a humiliating thing for Israel to have to experience this because they sowed the wind. God says it's like any harvest, right? You reap more than you sow. Instead of the wind that you sowed, you're reaping whirlwind. Finally, reaping the whirl means that her fear and shame will overwhelm her. We see this in chapter 10, verses 6 and verse number 8, if you're there. Ephraim, again, a reference to Israel, Ephraim being one of the major tribes of northern Israel, shall receive shame. Israel shall be ashamed of his own counsel. Verse 8, in the same chapter, they shall say to the mountains, cover us, and to the hills, fall on us. Can you ever be just so sick, so sorry, so sad, so weary, you just regret even to live another day? You just wish you could die. And that's what God is saying will happen to these folk who have rebelled against him, have chosen not to follow his ways. This really is a desperate statement. The hills or the mountains cover us and fall on us. It's interesting to me that the New Testament and the Old Testament are connected. And that reference in verse 8 shows up again in the Bible. Did you know that? Let's go to the next screen. In the book of Revelation, in chapter number 6, and I believe it's verse 16. Bring that slide up, please. Verse 16, and said to the mountains and rocks, fall on us and hide us from the face of him that sits on the throne and from the wrath of the Lamb. Interestingly, rebels in the future, in the days of the tribulation when the seal judgments, do you remember the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse? You got the white horse, the red horse, and the black horse, and the multicolored horse come with judgment. And that's just the first 4 judgments of the seal judgment. By the 6th judgment of the first series, there's 3 series of judgments in the book of Revelation. And after the first series, the people are saying, oh, this is too much. Please, just let the mountains fall on us and cover us up because it's so terrible. Sow the wind, reap the whirlwind. It really is a fearful thing to fall in the hands of an angry God. And I don't want to terrify anybody. I don't want to come across as a wind-sucking, fire and brimstone preacher, though there might be place for that at times. It is a fearful thing to fall into the hands of an angry God. Are you certain your affairs are settled with God? Are you right with him? It would be terrible to wake up someday and realize that you're reaping the whirlwind, that you're wishing the mountains and the hills would fall on you and cover you up so you didn't have to go on another day. We live somewhere between Hosea, about 700 years before Christ, And the tribulation, which follows this age, which is at least 2,700 years apart from Hosea to the tribulation, might be longer. But the God who lived at the time of Hosea, who sent judgment, and the God who in the future will send judgment in the tribulation, is still the God today. And He does get angry when people persist in their sin and refuse to change. And could that be you? Could God be speaking to you, saying one more time, won't you come? Won't you repent? Won't you get right with God? You don't want to reap the whirlwind. This should all give every person in the room reason to pause and consider future judgment in light of the fact that those who resist God suffer greatly. And I would hate for anybody in the room here to be on the wrong side of God, because you really could be on the right side of Him if you would just whisper a prayer right now of repentance, ask for forgiveness, and cling to the love and mercy of Jesus Christ. Wow. So is that it? Does Hosea preach a message and he said, man, look out, you've sowed the wind. Now you're going to reap the whirlwind. And that would be a pretty dismal message if that's all that we're here. But that's really not the whole message. I started in chapter 8, and we've touched on chapter 9 a couple times, and I just dabbled in the front portion of chapter 10. But we really need to come back to that theme we started with. Chapter 8, verse 7 was what? If you sow the wind, you will reap the whirlwind. But I gave you where I'm going earlier in the message, chapter 10, verse number 12. Near the end of this section, sow to yourselves in righteousness, reap in mercy, break up your fallow ground, for it is time to seek the Lord till He come and rain righteousness upon you. So that's where we need to go. There's hope in this verse. And that leads me to point number 3 today. Sow the wind, reap the whirlwind, but let's change the harvest. How can I change my harvest? Well, if you change how you sow, you can change what you reap. If you want the watermelon, you got to put the watermelon seeds in the ground. So He does give us in this verse a couple of things we can do. We can sow in righteousness, and if we do, we'll reap mercy. Sow in righteousness, reap in mercy. This has more to do not with the kind of seed, but how you sow it. How are you living? Righteousness has to do, and it's coming up on the screen, doing things by the book, following God's way of doing things. If you will sow that way in your relationships, you will do right to your spouse, and you will treat your coworkers friendly, and you will treat the mean woman at McDonald's who won't give you the sauce that you need for your dippers, all right? And you'll still be nice to her and try to treat her like Christ would. Then you're sowing righteously. That's the emphasis there. It's how you're sowing, not what you're sowing. Would you sow in a righteous manner in your behavior toward other people? Do right. Because if you do, guess what you reap? What's it say? It says mercy. This is the Old Testament word chesed. It is the word that God uses to describe His love for His people. It's used in other contexts as well, but also in God's relationship to His people, it's His loyal, unfailing love. Sometimes it's translated loving kindness in the book of Psalms. It means His kindness towards us. So if you would live the right way in your sowing, boy, you're going to reap the love and kindness of God. See, does God want to judge you? No, see, you could change the harvest. If you started sowing the right way, you'd get the right thing out of the ground. You'd get His love and mercy and grace, because you can change the harvest by how you sow. Now, you could go out of here and just say, well, I like what I'm sowing right now. I like pumping air from my air compressor in the ground and hoping for a crop. Or you could go out and say, you know what? I do need to clean up my act with my wife, or I need to clean up my behavior with my kids. Or I need to get that secret thing that nobody else knows about out in the open, and I need to ask for forgiveness. And I need to get things right with my fellow man. And if I did that, God would open up the gates of heaven, and love and kindness would start shooting up in my life. You can change the harvest. That's the message of Hosea. There's hope here. What else does he say in that verse? Sow that in righteousness reap in mercy. He says, seek the Lord And he comes back to the word righteousness. The two words are not identical, but they are related. They have the same base word. Zedek is the Hebrew word for righteous or righteousness. They are related, but the idea here is if you seek the Lord, if you'll pursue him, if you'll make him the one you pray to and the one who handles your problems and provides your needs, and you'll not consort with other people or other nations, and you will really seek the Lord, guess what he'll do? He'll deal righteously with you. Here it refers to his good favor upon us. One of my friends on the shelf said, it's not the word shalom, but it's kind of akin to that. All the wellness and blessing that you want, if you seek the Lord, he'll give it to you. So how do I change the harvest? I have to change how I sow. If I sow differently today, I can reap a better harvest tomorrow. It really does depend on me to live the right way and choose to follow God's way, because when I do, he rewards those who diligently seek him. In fact, that's the next reference, I think, on my outline. Hebrews 11, verse 6. He is a rewarder of them who what? Diligently seek him. Hebrews 11, verse 6. Yeah, but Pastor, this seems so hard. Can't we just live a little? Can't we just have a little fun? I mean, I got to work at trying to treat my family the right way and people the right way and do right just so I can get this harvest? Isn't there an easier way to do this? This is the Western mind, right? Can't I just push an easy button and Staples shows up with exactly what I need in 24 hours? I want you to think of it this way. Everybody has to pay at some time. Everybody has to pay up at some time. You could invest now and start reaping the returns of God's blessing upon your life. Or you could choose the broad and easy way now, and you're going to have to pay up in the end, and it's a lot more costly. So do you want to pay on the front end or the back end? But everybody has to pay. Personally, I think investing now and paying up with God now and trying to live righteously now is the better way to go, because I don't want to pay on the back end when the whirlwind shows up. Does that make sense? Yeah, it's worth the investment now. Seek the Lord. Or as a familiar commercial goes, it pays to discover. It pays to discover that God rewards those who seek him and follow his ways. This doesn't mean that if I change my harvest, God will take away the whirlwind and give me a windfall. That's what a lot of preachers preach, right? I'll avoid the judgment of God, I'll invite the blessing of God, and it'll be a windfall. And Joel Osteen will be right beside me on the stage, rewarding me for praying in faith and getting the $100,000 that I dreamed of, or the Corvette that I wanted to drive, or the vacation home in Sandy. All right, you get the idea. That's not what it's saying. It says you can't have the right kind of harvest, and you can't enjoy the mercy and love of God, and you can't experience his righteousness poured down upon you in favorable ways if you sow the right way. So it all comes down to this. What harvest do you really want? You plan your harvest tomorrow by what you sow in the ground today. So I want to position myself in a place where I'm sowing the right stuff so that down the road I'm getting the right kind of harvest. And you can do the same. I'm going to finish the lesson today by telling you about someone I met in Antioch, California in 1999. His name is Greg. And this is actually his picture. And I was surprised to find it on the internet this week. It made me reach out to him again. Greg and I had I guess you could call it a friendship. It was really a business arrangement. He and I both lived in Antioch, and when I was first in ministry out there, I was looking for someone to do my taxes. I responded to an advertisement, and Greg became my tax guy. And when I went to see Greg, I'd share the gospel with Greg. In the first year, he was kind of a little gruff about it and short with it. And I started off maybe not with a very good line, but I said, they say there's only two things definite in life, death and taxes, right? And I said, I'm here to do my taxes, but I'd really like to talk to you about the other thing. And I began to witness to him. He wasn't very interested at all in what I had to say. That's all right. I had an appointment to see him about 12 months later to do my taxes again. And actually, before that appointment came, he had sent me a letter in the mail. He said, I got some exciting news to share with you. I can't wait for our tax appointment. And he didn't tell me. He just kind of left me hanging with that little note in the mail. And when I arrived, he shared how his younger brother had found Christ in Southern California, called him one night on the phone, and led his older brother, Greg, to Jesus Christ 12 months after I'd witnessed to him. It was a thrilling, and I was just part of the chain. You know, this isn't the message, but all of us are part of a chain of people who need Jesus. Just keep talking about him, and the right chain will come together, and people will believe in Jesus. Just keep talking. I got to finish up, but he actually lives in Prescott Valley now. I just found that out this week. I might try to get together with him again. I just found that out yesterday. So let me tell you about Greg's story. One of the things he gave me at the first tax appointment, he was so excited. He didn't really want to talk about the gospel at that time. He wanted to tell me about his recovery story. You see, as a 19, 20-year-old, he weighed 285 pounds. He wore 42-inch size pants. He had high cholesterol and high blood pressure. His family kept telling him, you got to do something. You're not on a good path. And the doctors were saying that. His family was saying that. And he realized after stepping on the scales that if he didn't do something, he was going to create permanent damage to himself. So he tried all those get skinny fast programs, right? And he said none of them worked for me. So I gave up, and I just started to eat 3 kind of healthy meals a day: skinless turkey or chicken, rice or pasta, and a vegetable. And I just ate regularly, and then I started exercising. He said when I first started exercising, I couldn't even jog. I just had to walk. So I walked for a while until I could work up to jogging. He said he wanted to do crunches, but he couldn't do that. I can't quite picture it by his words, but he said he threw a rope over the bench, tied it around him, and pulled himself up to kind of do like a sit-up and he started over time doing push-ups, and he got up to, when he first started, he could hardly do 10, and within about 6 months, he was doing 500 a day. And within 6 months, he had lost 125 pounds, whatever the math is. That puts him down about 160, right? And he was well on his way to recovery. Great story. Why did I tell you that? Because Greg had to wake up one day and say, I want a different harvest. I've been feeding my body and treating my body the wrong way all of these years. And if I don't do something, the whole thing's going to implode. And so what he did something about it. He started to eat right, and he started to exercise. And today he's still a skinny guy, last time I saw him. And that's a relatively new picture, so that's probably pretty accurate. Listen, what are you feeding your soul today? Is there something right now you're popping down into the ground and you're not going to want the harvest a week from now, 2 years from now, 20 years from now? I'm inviting you. I'm giving you the opportunity to change your harvest today. Change how you sow so you can reap a better harvest. Will you respond? Shall we pray? Father, thank you for the